Welcome to Wednesday Live, everyone. I am so excited to share the special guest today, Shane Portfolio. Thank you for joining us, Shane.
You're welcome, Shannon. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, well, you are someone who I have always admired for many reasons, one of which is that you are always a champion of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Like, since I've known you, and that's going back at least 15 years. So this is not a new thing for you. And I wanted to be able to get your perspective as a white male executive who has, lived this life of trying to find a way to make things work for everyone. You're just, I'm so grateful to be able to share you with everyone, because like everyone that we have on Wednesday Live, you're someone who wants to make a difference. You are willing to put yourself out there in uncomfortable ways, and you're innovative. So I think that you have a lot to share with us.
Thank you.
So, way back, you were, I want to hear more about your childhood and kind of like where these seeds were planted for you early on. But then you were also a 14-year veteran of the United States Army.
That's right.
Yes.
Very proud.
Yes. Service.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. And then you went through a lot of leadership development courses with them, and you were platoon leader. And I think there was another layer of, what made you there. So I want to hear about that. And then like a lot of education from, you have invested your mind in a lot of education, including your current endeavor, which is to get a PhD in diversity and inclusion in technology. And I'm just blown away by the ways in which you find a way to make a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell me about like where this started, Shane. Like, what are some of your early memories of why it matters to be inclusive?
Yeah, thank you. So it is something that started at really young age. I was in a situation. It was just my mother and I in a single parent household, and in a very poverty-stricken community, one that almost 50% of the residents had English as a second language. We didn't have running water or electricity until I was in third grade. And so I was immersed into an incredibly diverse community from the very beginning. And that was really influential in who I became, because as a child, I was able to be raised with the closest friends of different ethnic backgrounds and different experiences, and it was interesting how when you don't have much, what creativity you come up with to enjoy each other's company and make sure that you care for one another.
Yeah.
And so my parents, my mom particularly, they were a bunch of hippies,
Mm-hmm.
and so they always cared more about how you treated people than they did about social status or material possessions or anything. And so the foundation of that started there.
Yeah.
And so I've always cared about people with a sense of community because of how I was raised in that community.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, the military. So I disappointed my hippie family by I rebelled against rebellion. I didn't do drugs or alcohol. I was short haircut, went to the military. They were so disappointed. But in all sincerity, that just that was a whole nother level, right? Because when I showed up to basic training, you get on, without exaggeration, you get on a cattle car with 100 different people you've never met before, and they just throw you in this thing. There's no place to sit, like you're barely holding on, and they're driving you to the destination where they all kick you out of the cattle car, and you get in formation, and you get yelled at and all this other stuff. And you're sitting there and you're seeing a very diverse community come together.
Yeah.
And you're seeing people that literally had grown up in either really rural communities and therefore hadn't seen anybody of a different color, and people that grew up in urban environments where that's all they knew.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dynamic of seeing that through the lens of what they were going through was a fascinating thing. And so one of the stories that I share a lot is our first day we were there, we went to the chow hall to get food. And as we sat down, you could see that the African American soldiers were sitting together, the Caucasian soldiers were sitting together, the Hispanic soldiers were sitting together.
Yeah.
And our drill sergeant came in and tipped over all of our plates, told us, we're not eating today. You need to go outside because this is not acceptable to them. And they said, if you want to eat again while you're with us, you will not sit down unless you have somebody at the same table you're at of a different color. And it was so fascinating to me how intentional they were about it. And it really resonated with me that this requires intentionality. Like, this isn't something that people are going to do because it's a nice to do thing or something that just happens. You have to really be incredibly intentional about it. And as they did that, and the intentionality of them holding us accountable to doing that, you could see the community came together and we became stronger. Wow. And it was interesting because the drill sergeants and drill instructors' job is for everybody to hate them, right? And for all of us to get together, and they're the ones that we collectively
the common enemy.
Exactly. And they just do such a great job. The military just does such a great job of making that happen, because then once people work through all those initial couple of weeks that were really uncomfortable, and we kind of had this common objective of kind of being together as a team, it was amazing to see what we were able to do. So those two things happening all before I was 18 years old was really the foundation of kind of where I came from and why it's so important to me.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Shane. Really helpful context and totally makes sense. So how do you draw the parallels between that intentionality of those leaders in the Army and leaders across America and worldwide, and just also the common enemy idea? Like, what does everybody have in common now that's the enemy? I haven't thought about that, but I want to hear yours. So just like, where do you see the parallels?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. First and foremost, we have to be really intentional about what we do. As leaders in particular, it's our responsibility to hold our teams and our people and ourselves accountable. As leaders, people are watching you all the time, and the echo and what I call the shadow that you cast is very significant. And if you're not genuinely committed to doing the right thing in terms of how you're building a culture that makes everybody feel like they're respected and included, that has a downstream effect that could be significantly detrimental to a culture and to a company. And so you have to start by holding yourself accountable in the behaviors and the actions that you take. So that's really important. And then you need to make sure that you then hold your leadership team accountable. And what I learned early on was, when you are in a responsibility of a very large organization, you really have the responsibility of making sure that you have a direct connection and a relationship with what I consider kind of two levels below you. So in my case, vice presidents and directors. And I need to make sure I have a personal relationship with them, that they understand this is what we stand for, this is what our culture is, this is how we intend to operate within it. And then it's my expectation that they do the same with their leaders, which is typically manager and supervisor level. And if we can do that, then the cascading from myself to the frontline leader, which I think is the most important in terms of the impact it has on people, because they're the ones that interact with the teams more than anybody else, can take place. And so at first I learned that I wanted to be able to have that relationship personally all the way down to the supervisor. And it was spreading myself too thin. And therefore, I think kind of the way of organizing it is making sure that you set the standards, and then you ask your leaders to really cascade that. And you can see it. There's a lot of things you can see. You can talk to people. You can sense if the culture is complementary to what you're trying to achieve or not pretty
Right.
quickly. And so um, that's an area I think is really important, is to check in and make sure that that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think if you do it to the degree that you're trying to do it all yourself, you'll fall short. So you really just have to be really clear about who you're looking to lead, and then make sure that they do the same, and the cascade effect happens. But you have to be really intentional.
Okay.
Um, and so that's one of the major things that I think is part of the success of any
Mhm.
culture.
Yeah. So can we just double down on that a little bit? When you get to the understanding of where you said like some cultures are, in need of more intentionality than others. Some have more sophisticated, like process, values, mission, clarity of purpose than others. So let's just say, you're a part of an organization, like many of our listeners might say, gosh, I'm in an organization that does not have really anything. I mean, maybe they made a post or two since George Floyd's murder, but have they really like taken a stand on this? Like where's the starting place?
Yeah, so it's complicated, because what I've seen is that leaders who typically had not made this a priority are generally trying to make it a priority now. Um, however, what that's creating is a condition where people aren't convinced that they're genuine about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're thinking that it's being done because it's the thing that's in the spotlight right now, and this is going to be something that happens for a short period of time. And there's a lack of trust that it's a sustainable part of a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I don't blame either party. I'm grateful that people who have not made this a priority are wanting to start to make it a priority. So I do not want to discourage them. As you mentioned earlier, I've been on this journey for my entire career. It's a very personal and passionate thing for me. So I've been investing in this area for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been disappointed in some of my peers and colleagues who haven't.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, as they start their own journey and they come to people like myself that they've seen make this a priority for a while,
Mm-hmm.
the last thing I want to do is discourage them from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when you talk to the people that are on those teams, they're like, now all of a sudden they want to make this a priority because of all these other injustices that
Mm-hmm.
have come to light. Where have they been?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not wrong for that. So it's really complicated. And I think what I keep encouraging people is don't try to come out of the gate at 100-mile-an-hour, because then people are going to interpret that as disingenuous. What you should do is really be thoughtful about what you're going to do over a very long period of time, and commit to it being something that you're going to integrate into the fiber of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a project that has a beginning and an end date. This is something that will continue to be an important topic for as long as we are in any culture. And if people realize that that's the intention, that you're looking to do this for the long term, then people are more willing to open up to you.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing you need to do is, as a leader that may not have a lot of experience or education or background, or have immersed themselves into this type of subject before, because it's very complicated, and there's a reason why people don't do it, because words can be misunderstood and create even worse conditions. And so avoid it is kind of and what I've been encouraging people to do is just listen. Right? Don't talk as much.
Yeah.
Right? You have 2 ears and you have 1 mouth. I don't think that design was by accident. And I think there was intentionality in the design of that.
Yeah.
Listen more. And I think when people see that you're genuinely listening and just genuinely paying attention to what they're going through and how it impacts them, and then you are steadily just trying to make sure you continue to cultivate that, and you're doing things that make them feel like you're really intentional around trying to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think over time, not initially, over time, that will start to begin a journey of trust that you can build on. But then what you have to be really careful about is that if you get to a place where the trust starts to occur and then you don't sustain it, that'll end up being worse than if you didn't do anything in the first place. So you really need to make sure you are very genuinely committed to this, or it could be something that has even detrimental impacts that are even larger than if you didn't even do it at all.
Right. Which is, I think, exactly the reason why some people haven't done anything.
That's right.
I think that they either don't know what to do, or they're concerned about, reducing even more trust by not following through or not actually making any tangible change. So, like, what would be an example of a long-term play or a long-term strategy that some leaders could consider when they're aiming to make this kind of intentional commitment?
Yeah, so one recommendation I have is establish listening sessions and make them, not something that's just for the next 2-3 weeks. Like, this is going to be just like a staff meeting is an expectation in many organizations that every week I'm going to meet with my leadership team and we're going to talk about whatever's hot in the business. You need to have this become one of those. It's just an expectation that once a week or once a month or whatever the interval is, it is a high priority. You don't miss it, and you show up as the leader every time, and you do that over a very long period of time, and that just becomes an expectation of the culture. And
what are you asking in these sessions, Shane? What do you recommend is the kind of format, or is it just an open discussion?
I think for the early stages of it, it should be an open discussion. Because what that will do, I believe, is show the genuine desire you have to listen. If you come to those meetings with your own design and your own communication and you end up dominating the meeting, it ends up not creating the connection that you want to create. So I have encouraged that you just go into these meetings and you listen and you hear what they have to say. And you do that for a while, and then you kind of come back and say, okay, team, here's what I heard. Am I listening correctly? And get affirmation of what you're hearing. And then say, okay, so here's the major themes that I think are coming up. How do you suggest we start working on a path to kind of addressing these? And that's when you start thinking about helping design and maybe bringing in other experts in this area, or bringing in external voices, or bringing in somebody else to help with that. But I think the first few need to really just be listening what's going on and getting to understand it better. Because the first couple that I've seen, and I've witnessed these, people aren't really open to talking. There may be 1 or 2 people that are courageous enough to say something, but the general population is still just trying to see, are you being really serious about this or not? But then the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and so on, they're like, okay, this is something that they're not just doing because they think it's the right thing to do after everything that's been brought to the light lately. And they begin to become more interactive, and they start to really share things. And there's 2 other things that happen.
Yeah.
One is, as the leader, if you say something uncomfortable and almost, and it's controversial in terms of the way that people would talk about this in the past, what I've seen is that people actually appreciate that. Because you're showing some sense of vulnerability. You're showing you're not just staying at 100,000 foot. You're really getting into the discussion. And I think people really appreciate a leader who's capable of showing some vulnerability in this area, even if it's as vulnerable as saying, look, this is a new thing for me. I really haven't focused in this area. I intend to start making it a priority. Can you please help me? I think people will appreciate that more than people who come in pretending as if this is a subject matter that they are an expert at, and they come off as disingenuous.
Right.
The second thing that happens is as people become more comfortable with you talking about it, they start reaching out to you to help you. Say, hey, this is a real priority. I think this should be what we focus on. And they really start helping you, and they start to help shape the design and the communication of what we talk about. But it takes some time to get there. And if people show the patience, I think that it'll end up paying off.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And what I so appreciate about you bringing this up right now, end of August, going into September, is I think some organizations have hosted listening sessions, maybe, a handful of them to get a sense of how people are feeling. But I don't know many who are sustaining them and continuing to have them and continuing to grow. And maybe they came up with some magic bullet and they are fixing things in a rapid pace. That's a possibility, I guess. But more likely, it's like I remember seeing an image of an iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg said racism that is caught on iPhones, and then this whole mass beneath the surface was racism, like the history of racism. So, systemic racism is the same way. And so I think that your encouragement to have listening sessions and really invest in understanding, seek first to understand and then be understood, like seek first to understand and then create a program or what does the action plan look like? What is the strategy? Because it's going to require that level of intentionality, like you said repeatedly. So thank you for the direction and, the encouragement to keep it going.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like anything else in business. It's an opportunity cost. Time is the one thing we can't get back.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so as a leader, what you have to do is really prioritize where you're going to spend your time.
Mm-hmm.
And your organization is looking to you to see how you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And if this becomes something that you prioritize your time with, I think that it's going to ultimately create a positive situation. Because where I have seen that happen, what's interesting to me is the word of mouth that happens around, hey, that organization over there, they're doing something that seems to be genuine around this. That's very attractive to me. I want to be a part of that culture. And then, the first courageous people that join the culture and get to be directly involved in it, get to really assess it at a level that others don't. Mm-hmm. And if it's done correctly, then they start reaching out to others. And the next thing you know, you have a organizational culture that everybody wants to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just, that's success to me. So anytime I'm in a situation, that's the culture I want, is that people want to be a part of it because of how they feel when they're in it.
Yeah. Like you really encourage their welcome. They're invited to be who they are, right? You're celebrating them as they are. You're not trying to change them. You're actually trying to change yourself.
That's right.
The inverse of what some mentoring or coaching engagements are like. You're the one who's seeking to learn and grow so that you can help to lead the change with their help, of course. So I want to talk about the competitive advantage of this in a minute, but I think it's important for us to address what are some of the challenges in being an ally at the level that you are.
It's a great question.
I don't just mean hierarchical level, although you're way up there, but in terms of the investment that you make.
It's interesting because, as again, some of the feedback I received over the years was, you're the camp counselor. You're the person that people come to when they don't like what they hear from others, and so they want to hear it from you. You're this and you're that, and you get this kind of almost negative connotation about you're willing to spend time in this area is actually a negative thing because others aren't. Mm-hmm. And that was very frustrating for me because what I've seen is that regardless of gender, regardless of color, regardless of background, people like to be led. And they like to get feedback. And what I've seen is a lack of courage of giving constructive feedback to diverse people, just because they feel like doing that could create some sense of uncomfortable feelings or feeling as if it's not good, and therefore they stay at a 10,000 foot view in terms of their communication to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not okay. Everybody deserves very direct, very detailed feedback on areas that they can improve. Everyone.
Yeah.
And when you become known for somebody who's comfortable enough to give that type of feedback to someone, then you become well known as somebody who's willing to do that in a way where they know it's always positive intention, and it's always looking out for them, and it's always in service of bettering them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that courageousness of going 1, 2, 3 steps a little bit deeper in terms of the specificity of what you're asking and suggesting that they do.
Mm-hmm.
People want that. They want that level of feedback, and especially when they know it's coming from a place of looking out for their best interests. And so that's what I do. That's why about 3 years ago, I read a book called One Big Thing. And One Big Thing, it illustrated that if there's a particular skill set that you have, you should really try to spend as much of time, if 40, 50% of your time, in that area.
Yeah.
And so my assistant and I carve out almost 40% of my time to mentoring other people.
Mm.
Which what that's created is people are aware how important it is to me.
Yeah.
But it also creates where my direct reports are doing things that typically my peers are going to. So for example, if my leader has a meeting and it's almost an expectation that the direct reports go to that meeting,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be in a mentoring session and I'm going to send one of my direct reports instead. And it actually creates a condition of empowerment and trust within your team.
Right.
So you get the best of both worlds. You get to do what you enjoy doing and what you feel you're really good at. And you get to create a culture that people enjoy being a part of because they're getting access to things that typically their colleagues aren't. And you just have to have the courageousness and the self-confidence that that's not going to negatively affect you.
Yeah.
And if you have that, then, it really ends up working out.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. I just want to share a couple comments with you. Lisa's with us. She says, hello. Ritu is here. And Nani says that she agrees and says providing feedback shows that you're interested in their growth and wanting them to succeed.
Yes.
A lot of affirmation. Yeah. So what are other obstacles? Like some that come to my mind. Well, one is the time, like when you just said 40% of your calendar is allocated to mentoring and that you like really prioritize this. And, it's like, what somebody cares about when you look at where they spend their time and money. But what, so that's one thing is the prioritization and the time blocking. I'm also thinking about how challenging it is to convince others who don't think that this is the best use of your time, even if it is that one big thing for you and that this is part of the reason why you exist. How do you make this important to other people, or at least have them respect why it's important to you?
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's a good question. I think you have to be really clear with what I call the 360, right? So your leadership, your peers, and your team, that this is who you are, this is how you're going to represent yourself, this is where I'm going to spend time.
Yeah.
And so they aren't offended or aren't taken back when you're not doing something that they expected you to, because you set those expectations up front. And I think it's important that that's something that you do right away. And then you obviously need to make sure that you're sensitive to the demands of your job. So that's got to be something that you don't neglect. But then once all of that's in place, then it really is up to you to figure out how do you fill in the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I always try to find time to make this a priority. But I think what I'm encouraging here is setting expectations very clearly to everybody you're directly involved with on a day-to-day basis on this is the kind of way that I approach things. Here's how I spend time. I think that they appreciate that, because then they don't have to come up with their own conclusions and misinterpret why certain things are happening or why certain things aren't happening.
Yeah.
Because they know that that's where you are in terms of where you spend your time and what you stand for. And I think that helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then in the interesting things that are happening now with the everyone being virtual, that's a whole nother level of kind of intentionality you need to have around this, because it's not as impactful, in my opinion, as being in the same room or doing something like that. So you have to really kind of double down your effort to do this. And so that's another thing. So, the protocols or the courtesies of keeping the camera on, of looking at somebody as if they're in the same room, of staying engaged, is in not being not multitasking. I think it's actually easier to see people multitask when you're on video than it is even when you're in person.
Yeah.
Because you can just see their eyes, or you can see their body language, or whatever the case is. So those are things I just think people need to even have greater sensitivity at, now.
Yeah. So that helps. And then for those who are struggling with, I don't really want to have these listening sessions because I don't know what I can do. Like I can understand and I could listen and I can, demonstrate my willingness to be a part of it. But like, this is a huge ship and how will I turn it in the middle of the ocean? I think sometimes the overwhelm of what some leaders perceive this is going to require is also a barrier. So how would you, let's just say I'm your peer and I'm having this challenge and I'm saying to you, Shane, I get what you're doing. I think it's great. But what do I tell them when I discover all of these, systemic racist challenges that we have that I personally don't think I can change?
Yeah. So first of all, there's strength in numbers. And my confidence level is pretty high that the themes that come to the attention of leadership are going to be pretty similar. And we need to work together as a leadership team. They may not be able to, as an individual, be able to do that. But if myself and 3 other colleagues all have the same themes that are coming from our organization around where we need to prioritize time, and we come together and we bring that to our most senior level leaders, there's power in that. And so I think the first thing is you're not in this alone. That we're in this together, and how can we work together to make that something that as a team we aggregate together and bring that to the attention of the people that have the most decision-making authority. That's really key. So don't ever make anyone feel like they're in this journey on their own. I think that's a very lonely place to be.
Yes.
And then the second thing is you have to ask them, what do you want your culture to be? What's really important to you? What is your priorities? What is almost the brand that your team wants to be known for? And you go through, and what I've done in the past is bring my team in, and we would spend all day starting with 500 words that all mean something to us. And then we would go from 500 to 250. And then 250 to 100, 100 to 50, all the way down to what are the 5 words that are the most important words that represent who we want to be, and how do we build like a logo or an emblem of something surrounding those words, and then how do we start communicating on a consistent basis? This is what we stand for, and here's what we want to make sure our culture is known for. And in doing that, almost every time, at least in the experiences that I've had, inclusion makes the cut, so people understand that that's so important, that it's a big deal. It's not some of these other things, and people start to see how important that is. So walking them through, what are your values? What are your organizational norms? What do you want to be known for? Really will help them understand that those are the areas that I think people will appreciate if you go through that type of exercise and you start communicating it. That's part of the intentionality that I talked about. And so that's one of the exercises that I typically would encourage them to do, and then work with them on kind of how do you communicate it, because once those are established, then it is up to you as a leader to invest in those areas with your team, right? And so that's when you start saying, okay, if this is important, how do I get investment of my team in these areas so they understand that I'm not just putting words on a piece of paper, that I'm very serious about this being a priority. Those are probably the two things I would do, is make sure they're not feeling alone.
Yeah.
And make sure that we go through the exercise of them understanding their priorities and what do they want their team to be known for. Because in one of the statistics I've recently read in my studies is women in particular in technology. 64% of them who graduate with an undergraduate degree in a technology field leave the technology industry in 5 years. And when you do research, it's because they don't feel respected, or they don't feel welcomed, or they don't feel like they're getting the same treatment as their male colleagues are.
Yeah.
Particularly white male colleagues. And so that it was a profound statistic that was heartbreaking, quite honestly, because you want to have a more diverse and more inclusive culture. And there's actually people that are willing to do that and take the courage and go get a degree and want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And then they don't like the way they're treated when they join. It's just very disappointing. So how do you make sure that that's not the case? How do you set them up with a sponsor? How do you set them up with making sure that you surround them with the support that they need? How do you make sure that when you're in a meeting and you can see that they're not being asked for their opinion, that you're intentionally asking for it so that their voice is heard in the room? How do you make sure that you build a culture that's intentional, that you're keeping everybody in a respectful place?
Right.
Those are the kind of mechanics behind how you do some of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Shane. On the long list of things I respect and appreciate about you is this level of commitment to doing this type of work. Because even the exercise you talked about is inclusive. It's not you saying, here's what we stand for. Here's what I've decided is the way in which we're going to do things. And Susan Perry's with us, and she says that she loves the exercise, and it's so important to proactively create the culture you intend. So very much affirming of that. And by you saying that, we're going to do this together, make sure that your peers don't feel like they're on an island, and that, you bother to do this type of work so that everything is so in sync, like purposeful.
That's right.
Going forward. And I also love how it demonstrates the flip of, sometimes people think that the thing that matters most is your technical skill or your intelligence. And what I'm hearing you say is like, yeah, that's kind of like a given, or like that's how you get the job. But then what matters most as a leader is how you make people feel and how you bring out the best in them and how you make sure that you're all aligned on a mission together, so that it's not just them obeying you, it's you all, walking purposefully in the same direction. I think that is just so awesome. And if you could send me that research study, Shane, I'll send it to those who registered for this event, because as you know, I'm a huge advocate of women in technology, and with the help of SETE and WICT and other organizations that we're trying to make environments where that exact thing that you mentioned, like the sponsorship, the inclusivity, really the recognition of what women leaders bring to a field like tech is unique and essential for organizations to thrive. So I think that's a good segue to the competitive advantage of diversity and inclusion. Like, it's not just the right thing to do, but it is also statistically a competitive advantage. And you, as an extreme athlete, and congratulations on your Pike Peak Marathon last week.
It was fun. It was fun to finally have something that wasn't canceled. So
right, exactly. I mean, when I do something like totally out of the box, like a Spartan race, you're like, oh yeah, I do those every weekend. So as a competitor, I think it's actually helpful to get the sense that, that you are someone who is in it to win it. And so you see diversity and inclusion and belonging as a competitive advantage. What can you teach us about that?
Yeah, so I really wish I would tell you that I'm this really deeply emotional, in touch with my self-awareness person that's on this PhD path because of that. And I would be telling you something that is completely inaccurate if that's the case. And unfortunately, it's a lot shallower than that. So for me, I want to win. Like, winning is everything to me, and I want a culture that wins. I want a team that wins. And so
Yeah.
as I researched what I wanted to study, I really wanted to do it from the lens of how is this study and how, because when you do a PhD, it's very time consuming.
Oh my gosh.
And so you need to be personally invested in what you're studying, not just professionally invested. I've done multiple master's degrees and they require time too. And I don't want to underestimate what that requires, because hats off to anybody who goes through that.
Mm-hmm.
The PhD is an entirely different level of immersive leadership, research and everything else. And if you don't really have passion for the topic, there's pretty good chance you're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really, really have passion about what you're studying and actually enjoy doing it, not doing it because you're looking to accomplish something.
Sure.
And so what I really have always studied is, how do leaders get the best out of their teams? How do people build world-class organizations? And the more I studied about that, the more I realized that there is a high degree of correlation to having a diverse organization to having a world-class organization, and that there is a direct connection to those two things. And so that really piqued my interest in terms of, here's something I really want to study then, because I really want to understand how and why is that the case, and what do I need to do as a leader to make sure that I build that, because that's the team I want to have.
Sure.
And so that's the studying that I'm doing. And then all the studies, to your point, statistically show that the more diverse the organization, the more senior leaders that are people of color or women, the more inclusive you are in terms of making sure people feel like they have a voice, the more respectful you are of everybody, of making sure everyone feels as if they can be their authentic self, the greater the chance of having a world-class organization. And so that's what I've really studied and really wanted to do. And so most of my studies is still around, how do I build a team that differentiates itself in a way where people just want to be a part of it. And they will, it's interesting that the more mature people get, the more determined they are about who they work for being more important than other areas, like their title and things like that become less important to them than, are they in a culture that they like to work in, and do they like and respect the leader they have? That becomes more important to people. It's certainly more important to me.
Yes.
And so that's the type of culture and type of leader I want to be, is that people, aspire to want to be a part of it. And I think when you do that, then you start creating winning teams. And when you start creating winning teams, and you start creating a creative contribution to the value of your company, and then they just start, asking you to do different things as a result of that. So that's really why I'm studying this, is I really want to do that. And then ultimately, once I'm finished with my, my corporate career, so to speak, I do want to go and teach. And so I'm doing it to prepare myself for a little bit of a longer term goal too. So that's what and then I just, in every turn, as you mentioned earlier, the competitive advantage you get when people feel like they can be their authentic self. In fact, the exercise I talked about, the word that meant the most to everybody at the end of that day was safety.
I was going to ask you about the 5 words that came out of it. Safety is one of them.
Yeah, so safety was like the word. So we had authentic. We wanted to be authentic. We wanted to be inclusive, right? We wanted to be agile, because we need to make sure we move things quickly. We needed to be bold, right? So too many decisions we make these days are around the edges, and not to be controversial, and just to keep kind of just surviving. And we're saying we got to be bold in our decisions, like make a decision. And if we're going to do a decision, we're going to make a bold decision. And then safety. And safety, in a lot of ways, people interpret as, are you having workplace accidents? Are you having something that's, something like that's occurring that requires workman's comp, or whatever that means. And what we really meant was psychological safety, that people just feel safe being a part of the culture they're in.
Sure.
And with the current pandemic and the current economic environment and the current increased awareness of all the injustice that's happening, it's even more important now than I think it was previously, because there's just natural nerves and natural anxiety a lot of people are experiencing because they're not connected as they once were. And so that psychological safety is as important, if not even more important than it ever has been. So that's kind of our primary thing. If you can get people to be psychologically safe, that they can be themselves,
Sure.
it's amazing what they can bring to the table.
Agreed. Oh my goodness. And I'll send some resources to everybody who registered, because I think this is such an important thing to learn more about. And something that's synonymous with psychological safety is something you mentioned earlier, which is vulnerability, and that willingness to be imperfect and be on the journey just like everyone else. So as much as I totally agree with you that people want a leader, I think they also want a leader who is on, evolving and learning and willing to admit mistakes and ask for help and all of those things that vulnerability requires us to do. And I think that psychological safety of mistakes will happen, especially if you're going to be bold, right?
Exactly.
Those two things, agile, bold. I mean, that just means we're going to be moving. We're going to take a stand on things, and we're not always going to get it right. And so let's be willing to do that in an inclusive way, right? And what you're saying here too is about the research indicating that what matters the most is that people can bring their authentic self to work.
That's right.
Yeah.
It matters so much. And to your point, I fail all the time, all the time. And I tend to find that I learn more from that than I do when I'm successful at something. So I encourage failure.
Yeah.
I encourage that we take time and we learn from it. I encourage that you share your failures with others so that they understand that they're not alone in the fact that they may have failed too. I think failure has this negative connotation associated with it, when I think failure actually can bring some of the best learnings to the organization and to your team.
Totally agree.
I fail more often than I'd want, but I try to learn from it, and I let my team
cover it up, and you don't blame, and you don't have excuses. It sounds like, and I know you personally, so you own it.
Yeah,
and you say, here was the information I had. Here's the assessment I made. Here's the call, and here's why that was incorrect. And here's what I learned later, right? Like that after action report where you debrief something to say, what can we learn from this? So 2 points on failure. One is, I love that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, and she says, learn from the mistakes of others. You'll never live long enough to make them all yourself.
That's awesome. I love that one too.
And then, the founder and designer of Spanx, the women's undergarment, empire, really, is Sarah Blakely. And I saw an interview with her recently, and she said that failure is something that was highly encouraged in her household, and how every night at dinner, her father would look at she and her brother and say, what did you fail at today? And so if there wasn't anything to talk about, he was disappointed. And I thought, my gosh, what a great culture to instill with your children and with your teens is, really encouraging smart failure, the failure that comes from just putting yourself out there.
That's right.
Yeah.
I like that one too.
Awesome. Yeah. Sarah Blakely. That's her name. I don't know what I said, but that's it. So let's talk about the difference between diversity, inclusion, and equity, because I think sometimes there's a little bit of a misunderstanding there. So I saw this image recently, and sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, where, equality is that everybody's got the same size box, right? But then when you're looking at equity, is that it is adjusted for the height of the individuals who need them. And this one I like because it shows us those two images, but then the liberation is that there's no wall. But then I looked this up and found this right here, which is what you're talking about. This inclusion is when, there's no wall, you're all in it together, and they're actually the same team. you notice that they're all wearing the same jersey. So that's what you're after, Shane, right? You're after everybody's wearing the same jersey.
Everyone is wearing the same jersey, and we each have our role to play, right? So I recognize that as a leader of a team, I have responsibilities that I need to make sure that I take accountability for as the leader of that organization. And leadership in many ways can be a very lonely place because you have to make some decisions that maybe others don't need to make. But if I'm going to expect excellence from them and the responsibility they have, they should expect that from me too. And so I don't ignore the fact that there's responsibilities that come with being in the leadership position that is unique and different than people that aren't. So that is something that I think is important. But the way in which you do that is what creates that culture, and that people want to bring their best self and do the role and responsibility they have to the same level of excellence that you are, because it should be a binary, bidirectional kind of thing that you're bringing in your best or you're not. And that's important. And I think that's, there's I love the same jersey, but I also love the kind of each of us have a role to play. There's only one quarterback on the team, but that quarterback will be completely unsuccessful unless he or she has the good wide receivers and the linemen and so on. But each of them in unison is how you create championships, right? Because you're working together. And so that's why I love that last illustrative example, that everybody's on the same team, everybody's got the same jersey.
Yeah,
absolutely. But then everybody should really be accountable to doing the role in which they're assigned to the best of their ability. And if you do that, it's amazing what happens. You study these sports teams that have dynasties, right? Patriots or the Chicago Bulls or all these things, and you realize a couple of things. One, the Chicago Bulls they have the greatest player of all time on their team, but until he had teammates that were really good, he didn't win anything. But as soon as he did, they won 6 championships because he had teammates. It wasn't about him, right? And so even the best player of all time cannot do it by themselves.
Right.
And it takes their teammates to surround them to win championships. And so there isn't anybody, I believe, that can do anything like that on their own. You have to surround yourself. But then what they did is they made sure that each of them did their role to the best that they possibly could. And together they became this incredible organization. And that's the common theme that I see in every research study I do about teams that win, is that they're inclusive, they're respectful, but they're also really accountable to doing the job that they were asked to do to the best of the ability of that particular responsibility that you're responsible for. And that's an important aspect too.
Oh my gosh, Shane, that's spot on. I mean, if only people heard just the last couple minutes of our time together today, that is enough to go on. Is how can we make a team where everybody has a position that's clear, that we have a purpose, that we're not just all, playing a different sport at the same time, but we're all really in unison here with what we're trying to accomplish, and that you stay, true to where your strengths are, which is that bringing your authentic self to work, right? Everybody has different abilities and interests and knowledge and all of those things, like, putting those into play. Like, and a shout out to The Last Dance. I don't know. Have you seen The Last Dance yet?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. And that just shows you, like, Michael Jordan, with the help of Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman and the rest of the team, those 3 are highlighted to a degree that I had not understood how well that collaboration of strengths is what enabled the Chicago Bulls to be what they were. But I think it's a great illustration too, to bring back to our own workplaces. And even if there's only 3 of us, how can we leverage the 3 of us? But in cases like yours, where you have thousands of employees and millions of customers and, an outreach that's beyond measure, how do you just implement a plan where that can cascade out to the masses.
That's right. And then the last thing is be intentional about making sure that the person that is in a leadership responsibility, we have a greater level of diversity in those positions. Because I think that's really important. And you give people the opportunity to do that. And, you have to start now in two ways, giving more senior level positions. But I think the other thing we have to do is really rally around people at a frontline leadership position now. Let's start right now. Let's start building this bench right now so that we can care for the senior leaders. Let's make sure we care for that right now too.
Yeah.
But if that's all we do, then we're missing the point of having a sustainable bench that's long-term, which I've mentioned is so important to this being a part of your culture. So you have to make sure that at the C-level table, so to speak, that's well represented. But I think just as important is, what does your supervisor frontline leadership team look like, and what are your managers and directors? And so you have this kind of continuous bench of really good players that when the time comes for them to get the ball, they're ready. So
yeah, they're ready. Exactly. And I think that goes back to a point you made earlier, Shane, which is about providing feedback, coaching, development, investing in these people, investing in your talent, looking at the bench with the succession plan and the long game in mind, but also with that, like you used the word courage when you talked about that. And I think that's really important for leaders to hear, that it's an investment of your time, your energy. It requires courage. And it also requires that intentionality of noticing what that talent is doing or not doing, or, ways that you would help direct them to round out their skill set or to be eligible for that next level.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And I applaud the people that take the courage to take on that responsibility, because I'm sure that that's not easy for them. And so my responsibility is to try to make sure that they realize I'm there for them as they go through that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. All in. Well, thank you, Shane.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Give everybody a little bit of what goes on in that awesome brain of yours, and how we can be more effective leaders and really make our organizations a place where everybody belongs.
Well, I appreciated the opportunity, Shannon. Thank you very much.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye, Shane. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.